Hello everyone, welcome to my YouTube channel where we do painting tutorials. For today I have this little landscape, so I'm just gonna start by taping down my watercolor sketchbook. That's just a little helpful tip to make it stay flat as I paint. Then I proceed to color the top half of my page with some ultramarine blue, which is going to be my sky. And I activate it. I try to make this very smooth because it's the sky and skies are generally smooth. I'm using a normal brush for this because I couldn't find my watercolor pen brush. While it's still wet, I just tap with my tissue with a napkin to lift off some of the paint and make it look like clouds. While that dries, I sketch a little path on the lower half of my page with some Venetian red, which is this reddish earthy tone, and then I proceed to activate that one as well. Since this is going to be ground, a path, some texture is perfectly fine. You only needed the sky to be smooth. For everything else, absolutely do not stress. Texture is perfectly fine. Once dry, I take my ultramarine and with a bit more pressure, I make this mountain on the horizon and then I blend that one as well. While it dries, I take a scrap piece of watercolor paper and I apply my main colors, so the ultramarine, some cad orange, earthy green, yellowish orange, and a bit of black. I'm going to use this scrap piece of paper as a palette to mix my colors and get whatever tone I want. I mix some of the blue with the orange and a bit of green, a very small amount of green to do a darker mountain. This more towards us. Instead, you can obviously just mix your colors on the painting, draw a mountain with blue, then layer on top some orange and some green, but it's a bit hit or miss. You never know the exact tone you're going to get, and mixing them on a scrap piece of paper, you see the color you're mixing as you go, so it's just much easier to control. While it dries, I take off those colors and I darken up my path, applying shadows mostly on the left side. Then again, I activate them to make them a bit more vibrant, and I definitely do not go for perfection. Streakiness, texture, and all of that is perfectly welcomed for this painting because nature is indeed textured. So just activate everything to the point it's more saturated and leave it to dry. Then I take my big patch of green from my little piece of watercolor paper, I activate it, and I do a very loose base layer of green for my trees, for my forest scenery. Once it has dried, I take a light orange or a yellowish orange, I'm not really sure what that one is called, and I add some warm highlights on the right side of each tree, and I use helium blue reddish, which is my darkest blue, to add shadows on the left side of each tree. Then I fill the middle with my earthy green, which is my base green color. It's the only green I'm going to use for this. Then I take my watercolor brush and I start blending / activating from light to dark, so from the orange highlights towards the green towards the blue. While those two trees dry, I do the same exact with the trees I have there further up in the distance. I use orange for the highlights, blue for the shadows, and then activate as I go. This is the same process I'm going to be using for all of my trees in this painting. So definitely nothing special. If drawing is not your thing, I am going to make a traceable for this painting over at my Patreon page, Sunshine Arts. And like always, all of the supplies used will be linked down in the description box along with the reference picture. But mind you, I just used that picture more as an inspiration / idea. So I apply some helium blue reddish on the left side of my path, so it looks like the trees are casting their shadows on top of the path. I lightly activate that, and again I keep on with my second layer on top of the trees, adding the highlights and the shadows. I want to cover up that big blue mountain we did in the beginning because it's a bit too saturated, so I'm going to need to work it a bit because watercolors are transparent, so you are usually able to see all of the layers behind. I'm just going to work it in with my brush and make everything activate and try to smooth it down a bit because I don't want you to be able to see the mountain throughout the tree. Trees are not transparent. I hope that makes sense. Then I apply some blue and orange on my right side of the path, which is going to be covered with more trees that are going to be on the right. It's perfectly fine if some goes over the path. Maybe there's grass growing, maybe there are bushes or flowers, I don't know. And while it dries, I take my walnut brown and I start drawing the tree trunks, just some straight lines. You can maybe do V shapes. It doesn't really matter. Tree trunks come in all shapes and sizes, so take all of the creativity you want with this. I do some tiny dashes, some tiny lines on the tree crowns to make it look like you can see the branches here and there popping through the foliage, and just try to keep it a bit more interesting. Then I mix some of my helio blue reddish with my cadmium orange, and I use this color as another shadow for my final layer, and I just apply it on the left side and on the bottom of each tree crown. While it dries, I do my final tree, so I lightly sketch it out with some black, because in the reference picture it looked black, but if I were to redo this painting, I would maybe pick out a lighter mix, maybe again more of the green, more of the blue, and barely any black. But for this one here, I did black and earthy green, which ended a bit dark, but I don't mind it. So just very loosely, very lightly sketch out some branches, some foliage, and bring it down towards the ground where we darkened up that piece of the path on the right side. I'm just randomly tapping. I don't know if you noticed, I didn't have a base sketch when I started, so I made this painting up as I went without any clear intention, without a clear idea. I just went with the flow here. Then I take a bit of that dark mix and I apply it beneath the tree for an added shadow. I take a bit more green and I apply it on the tips of all of the branches, on the leaves. And then I take a darker mix with a bit more black and I apply it beneath each tree branch and beneath the leaves. I want to outline the tree trunk a bit better, so I go on top of that and I add little hints of grass that are coming up around the tree. And in the reference, I have a couple of wires across the sky, so I'm just going to quickly do those with black. I add a bit more shadows on the pathway just to darken it up even further. I do a very loose layer of greens to add more texture. And lastly, I take my black and like I said, I further outline my tree on the right side and a bit of the foliage. Lastly, I just slowly peel off the tape in the opposite direction to avoid my paper from ripping apart. I like to give a very special thank you to my patrons for the month of February, and thank you all for watching. We will see each other in the next video. Bye bye!